Imagine for a second that you are running for your life. You're barefoot, you are weeping, you're like climbing a mountain just to escape the city you built.
Yeah, your own capital.
Right. And the military coup that is chasing you, it's being led by your own son.
It's an absolute nightmare scenario.
It really is. Now imagine that when you finally sit down in the dirt to, process what is happening, you decide to write a text about it. And you title that text a song.
Which is, it sounds completely counterintuitive. You would expect a diary entry of pure despair, honestly.
Exactly. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, our mission is to unpack an absolute masterclass in processing betrayal written by someone who hit that exact rock bottom.
King David.
King David, fleeing from his son Absalom. We are looking at a brilliant exegetical essay on Psalms chapter 3. And the author of this essay goes by Frank Leo, though I have to point out his full pen name on this paper is delightfully global.
Oh, yeah, it's amazing.
It really is. It literally weaves together Chinese, Hebrew, and Greek characters right there on the title page, which is fitting because this essay takes a single ancient text and reads it on historical, linguistic, and theological levels all at once.
It's a massive undertaking. And Psalm 3 is, it's the perfect text for that kind of multi-layered analysis.
Right.
If you're a student of ancient literature, this is a massive milestone. It's the very first psalm in the Bible that features a superscription.
Which is like a historical title setting the scene, right?
Exactly. And crucially, it's the first individual lament. So to decode how David survives this, we are going to be pulling from, a lot of heavy hitters. The Babylonian Talmud, the medieval commentator Rashi, the Midrash.
And some ancient translations too, right? Like the Greek Septuagint.
Yes, the Septuagint and the Aramaic Targum.
Okay, let's unpack this because I want to start right where we opened with this glaring paradox. Before we can understand David's survival strategy, we have to look at the strange way he frames this trauma.
The whole song thing.
Yeah. He calls it a mizmor, a song. I don't get it. Why on earth is a text about fleeing your murderous son called a song instead of like a kina, which is a lament or a dirge?
Well, you're definitely not the only one who doesn't get it. This raised a huge red flag for the early sages, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah. In the Babylonian Talmud, Rabbi Yohanan quotes Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai asking this exact question. He basically says, shouldn't this be a lament?
Right, because of the context.
Exactly. And the Talmud explains that years earlier, God had warned David through a prophet that evil would rise up against him from within his own house.
Because of his past sins. We're talking about the whole situation with Bathsheba.
Precisely, the Bathsheba incident.
Yeah.
And David lived in absolute terror of this prophecy for years. Talmud says he thought the agent of his punishment was going to be a ruthless slave or maybe someone who had absolutely no familial bond to him.
Someone who would show him zero mercy.
Right.
So he was basically waiting for a monster to show up at the gates.
Yes. So Rashi, the great 11th century commentator, he expands on this psychological state. Rashi says David's heart was in constant turbulence.
Yeah.
But when the rebellion finally broke out and David realized the leader was his own son, Absalom, he actually rejoiced.
Wait, hold on.
I know, it sounds crazy.
Finding joy in your son hunting you down just because he might have a shred of mercy, that sounds like intense psychological coping. Is Rashi reading too much into this just to justify the word song?
It sounds wild to us, sure. But the Talmud gives this brilliant analogy to explain the mechanism of this relief. So imagine a man with a massive looming debt.
Okay.
Before the debt is called in, he's eaten alive by anxiety every single day. He's waiting for the shoe to drop.
Yeah, that dread is awful.
Right. But once he finally pays it, even if it bankrupts him, he feels this immense joy just to have the anticipation over with.
Wow.
For David, the worst had finally happened. The waiting was over. And because it was his son, he held on to the hope that his son, deep down, might still have a drop of compassion.
That is wow. That profound paradoxical relief is why it's categorized as a song.
Exactly.
So the waiting is literally worse than the disaster. That is incredibly dark. But psychologically, I can see how that mechanism works.
Yeah, it's very human.
And the linguistics of the essay back this up too, because the author points out the bitter irony of Absalom's name.
Oh, yes. Absalom, or Abshalom in Hebrew, it literally means father of peace.
Oof.
Yet his actions bring the exact opposite. But then you look at that word mizmor, meaning song. It comes from the root ziamar, which, yes, means to make music, but its agricultural meaning is to prune.
Wait, like pruning a bush?
Yeah. pruning a plant.
Let's unpack that metaphor because I don't think it's just a fun fact. When you prune a plant, you are violently cutting away branches so the core can survive, right?
That's exactly how it works. A Mizmor is a poem that has been pruned of all redundancy. The sprawling, chaotic vine of grief has been cut back until only the strongest, barest stem survives to carry a melody.
That is beautiful.
The sorrow has been trimmed down to its absolute core.
You know, the Midrash Tehillim offers another angle on this weeping versus singing dynamic that really, I think, grounds it in leadership.
Oh, right, the leadership aspect.
Yeah, it asks, how could David be weeping as he fled up the Mount of Olives, but also singing? The Midrash says he saw that his core leadership, his closest advisors, the Sanhedrin, which was the ancient high court, they stayed loyal to him.
That changes the dynamic completely, doesn't it?
Right. I mean, if you're listening to this and you've ever gone through a brutal professional betrayal, think of it like a hostile corporate takeover.
Yeah, that's a great modern parallel.
The CEO is weeping because their own protege orchestrated a boardroom coup. The company is gone.
Everything they built.
Exactly. But they feel this overwhelming, almost euphoric relief because their core executive team, the people they actually trust, they look at the protege and say, no, we're walking out with the boss.
Yeah.
That loyalty in the dark is what allows the song to exist alongside the weeping.
It is the validation that you aren't entirely alone, which is crucial because we need to look at exactly who David is singing against in this text.
Oh, right. Because it's not just a random mob.
No, in verse 2, he says, "O Lord, how many are my adversaries?" But the essay emphasizes that these are highly coordinated enemies.
Rashi gives us a really critical insight here into the Hebrew word for many, Rabbim.
Yes, he points out that it doesn't just mean a large crowd, it means great ones.
So we are talking about the elite, the intellectuals, the wealthy elites, the military strategists of Israel.
People like the legendary warrior and counselor Ahithophel.
Right. The absolute best and the brightest of the kingdom have all coordinated to turn against him.
Which explains the incredible pressure David is feeling. The linguistic root of the word adversaries here is zorai. It comes from a word meaning narrow or constricted.
Like a bottleneck.
Yeah, it's the physical sensation of claustrophobia, of the walls literally closing in on you. The author contrasts this beautifully with the biblical concept of salvation, which is almost always described as a wide, open, spacious place.
But that claustrophobia isn't just physical, is it? They have him surrounded militarily, yes, but they are also cornering him theologically.
They absolutely are. And that brings us to the taunt in verse 3. His enemies are mocking him, saying there is no salvation for him in God.
Let's pause here because we need to understand why that specific taunt is such a deep cut. They aren't just saying you're going to lose the battle.
No, they are going after his soul.
They are executing a character assassination.
Exactly. Rashi explains that they are throwing his past in his face. They're essentially saying, remember Bathsheba. Remember the innocent blood you spilled. Your covenant with God is permanently severed. God is done with you.
Man, that is brutal.
And what's fascinating here is how the essay highlights a shift in the divine names to illustrate this theological warfare.
Yes, the Elohim versus YHVH debate. Walk us through how those names function here, because I found this part so interesting.
Okay, so the enemies specifically refer to God as Elohim. In Jewish tradition, Elohim represents the attribute of strict, uncompromising justice.
God as the ultimate judge.
Right. The enemies are looking at David's life like a forensic ledger, and they are saying, under the strict letter of the law, you broke the contract. You're out.
So they are trying to lock him into a courtroom.
Yes. But David refuses that framing entirely.
He really does. When David responds, he doesn't use Elohim. He invokes YHVH, the tetragrammaton, the four-letter, unutterable name of God.
The name associated with God's mercy.
Exactly. Mercy, compassion, and the personal covenant. The enemies see a courtroom, but David is appealing to a relationship.
It's a brilliant theological countermove.
And right after that devastating taunt from the enemies, we get this famous word, Selah. You see it everywhere in the Psalms. Is it basically just like an ancient mic drop?
Well, it is one of the great mysteries of biblical translation, honestly.
Really?
Yeah. The essay unpacks two major ways to read it, showing how it functions as both a musical and theological marker. First, the Talmud says Selah means forever.
Okay, so a permanent theological punctuation mark.
Exactly. In this context, the enemies are saying David is damned forever.
But the other interpretation changes the whole vibe, doesn't it?
Right. Ibn Ezra, as well as the ancient Greek Septuagint translation, view it as a musical notation. The Septuagint translates it as dipsalma, an interlude or a crescendo.
Oh, wow.
Imagine the orchestra suddenly swelling, forcing everyone to stop talking, sit in the silence, and feel the crushing weight of what was just said.
It's the moment the despair reaches its absolute peak. The psychological weight of that taunt pushes David to his breaking point.
Yeah.
And structurally, that takes us to verse 4, which is the pivot of the entire text.
Right. This is where a concept called form criticism comes in. Hermann Gunkel, a giant in biblical scholarship, identified this moment.
Wait, stop right there. I hear form criticism and my eyes glaze over. What is that, practically?
Fair enough. Form criticism is basically looking at ancient texts and identifying their genre rules. Kind of the same way you'd recognize the rules of a horror movie or a romantic comedy.
Okay, that makes sense.
So Gunkel noticed that in the genre of the biblical lament, there is almost always a dramatic volta, a sharp turning point.
Ah, okay. The moment the script flips.
Exactly. And here it hinges on two emphatic Hebrew words, viata, but you.
Oh, I love that.
David pivots violently away from human despair and makes a declaration of total confidence in divine grace. He says, but you, O Lord, are a shield about me.
The shield metaphor is so rich here, especially when you compare the Hebrew and the Greek translations. Let's look at the mechanisms of that. Because in Hebrew, a shield migan is a defensive military weapon.
Right, very literal.
It echoes God's ancient promise to Abraham, I am your shield. It's very physical. God is blocking the arrows. But the Greek Septuagint translates it differently, don't they? Why would a Greek translator change the meaning?
So they translate it using the Greek word antilumpture, which shifts the meaning from a piece of armor to a personal protector or an advocate.
Like a patron.
Yes.
Yeah.
You have to remember the cultural context of the Hellenistic world in Alexandria, where the Septuagint was translated. Society operated heavily on the patron-client system.
Right, right.
The translator wanted to emphasize God not just as a physical barrier, but as a powerful personal patron who actively steps into the courtroom to take your case and defend your honor.
So the Hebrew says God blocks the swords, and the Greek says God takes my case.
Precisely. And the verse continues, God is the lifter of my head. The grammar here is a continuous habitual tense.
Oh, that's interesting.
Think about the historical moment. David is climbing a mountain, weeping, his head literally hanging in shame. But he realizes that God's very nature is to perpetually restore dignity to the lowly.
God is in the ongoing habitual business of lifting up defeated heads. And this realization fundamentally changes David's physical state. The transition of his nervous system from verse 4 to verse 5 is wild. He prays, and the way he prays is heavily analyzed in our sources.
Definitely. Verse 5 says, I cry aloud to the Lord, and he answers me from his holy mountain. The Aramaic Targum actually expands this verse.
How so?
Instead of just saying God answered him in the past tense as a one-time event, the Targum shifts it to an ongoing reality. It translates it to say, God accepts my prayer continually, connecting it deeply to the temple sanctuary.
And the Mishnah Barakot adds some crucial context about the style of this prayer. They point out that David's prayer here is the total opposite of a fixed rote routine, which they call kava.
Right, kava.
If you've ever just mumbled through a script because you felt obligated, that's kava. David isn't doing that. His prayer is ta'anunim.
Raw, urgent, existential supplication.
Exactly. It's screaming from the absolute depths. And the physical toll of that raw prayer leads to verse 6. I lay down and slept. I awoke, for the Lord sustains me. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. When I first read that, I pictured David finding this, Zen-like peace, taking a refreshing nap and waking up feeling better. But Rashi looks at this and says, absolutely not.
Rashi's psychological reading here is incredibly sharp.
It really is. Rashi says this sleep wasn't peaceful. It was a physical collapse. David's heart was so sealed up with worry and fear that his nervous system essentially short-circuited. He passed out under the unbearable weight of anxiety.
It's a trauma response.
Yeah.
The body literally shuts down to protect itself.
Yes. If you're listening and you've ever been so overwhelmed by stress that you just crash hard in the middle of the day, that's what Rashi says happened to David. But then Rashi says the awakening when David comes to lay was the literal return of his faith.
He woke up with this sudden, unexplainable clarity that God was holding him together.
And that concept of being held together is deeply embedded in the linguistic roots of the Hebrew, isn't it?
It is. The word for sustains me is yuzmakeni, which comes from the root word simika.
Like the laying on of hands.
Yes, exactly. It's the specific word used when a priest forcefully presses their hands onto a sacrifice, or, when someone is physically ordained.
Okay, wow.
It implies a firm, weighty connection. God isn't just watching David from a cloud afar. God is physically leaning in, placing his hands on David and becoming the literal structural brace upon which David rests his weight.
That is a stunning image. And feeling that physical support completely reinvigorates him. He wakes up ready to face these impossible odds, which leads to this dramatic, fearless call to action.
Yeah, he says he will not fear the myriads, the tens of thousands of elite enemies surrounding him.
The contrast from the beginning of the psalm is staggering. Remember, these enemies are the Rabbim, the Great Ones. They have set themselves against him strategically, but the claustrophobia is gone. David calls on God with one of the most forceful verbs in the Psalms, arise.
Koma. It's so visceral.
It really is. And he doesn't just ask for generic help. He asks God to strike the cheek and break the teeth of the wicked. It's incredibly graphic, violent imagery. Why teeth and jaws?
Well, the Midrash provide a very specific historical context for that violence. They connect the imagery of the broken jaw and throat directly to Ahithophel.
Oh, the counselor.
Remember, Ahithophel was David's brilliant counselor who orchestrated this entire betrayal. His words, his mouth were his weapon.
Right.
But when Absalom eventually rejected Ahithophel's advice, Ahithophel went home and hanged himself.
Ah, so it's a retributive fate.
Yeah.
A betrayal born in the mouth ends with a fate tied directly to the throat and jaw, answering the imagery of the broken teeth.
Exactly. The consequences rebound on the betrayer.
Which brings us to the ultimate climax in verse 9. Salvation belongs to the Lord. The Midrash frames this not just as a victory cry, but as the winning argument in that massive theological debate we talked about earlier.
Right, circling back to the taunt.
Yes. Back in verse 3, the enemies claim there was no salvation for him. Here, David triumphantly declares that salvation in its absolute totality belongs to YHVH, the God of mercy. He gets the last word. And Rashi points out the beautiful reciprocity in the second half of the verse. Your blessing be upon your people.
Yeah, Rashi notes the dynamic there. It is God's role to save, and it is the people's role to bless and thank him continually.
It's the entire covenant distilled into one sentence. But, I want to push back on something before we wrap up. King David's story is fascinating, but why did the ancient sages preserve this specific family drama so carefully? How does this apply beyond David?
That is the perfect question to ask. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it goes far beyond a domestic dispute. The Talmud actually juxtaposes this Psalm 3 with Psalm 2, which is about the nations of the earth raging against God.
So they're linking personal trauma to global events.
Yes, they are making an eschatological shift. The sages read the rebellion of a son against a father as a typological foreshadowing. It's a fractal.
Can you explain what you mean by a fractal here?
Sure. Think of a fractal as a pattern that looks the same, whether you zoom all the way in or zoom all the way out.
Yeah.
Zoomed in, you have the micro trauma. A son rebelling against his father, King David. Zoomed out, at the end of the world, you have the macro trauma. The ultimate rebellion of humanity, the nations of Gog and Magog rebelling against God.
Wow.
By linking these psalms, the Talmud takes a deeply personal family betrayal and elevates it. It becomes a cosmic blueprint for God's ultimate victory over chaos.
So what does this all mean for you, the person listening right now? It means that this ancient text isn't just a historical diary entry of a king having a bad day.
Not at all.
Through the lens of the Talmud, Rashi, and these incredible linguistic roots, Psalm 3 reveals itself as a masterclass in survival. It maps out the exact mechanism of how to process betrayal. It shows you how to move from that claustrophobic fear of the elite plotting against you to the raw, unfiltered prayer of a nervous system breakdown, to a state where you are physically sustained by grace, all the way to ultimate vindication.
It validates the sheer terror of the human experience, but it insists on the reality of the rescue.
It really does. And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We talked at the beginning about that fault line running right through your own home. If David had never been driven out by his own son, if he had never faced this exact, terrifying, elite conspiracy, he would never have hit the emotional rock bottom necessary to compose this specific mizmor.
True.
That violent pruning process we discussed, it would never have happened.
The song required the suffering to exist.
Right. It makes you wonder, are the most excruciating disruptions in your own life actually the pruning process required for you to write the song that future generations are going to use to survive their own dark nights? We hope this deep dive gave you some new tools and perspectives for your own journey. Thank you for joining us, and remember, keep questioning the surface of everything you read.